This service and maintenance video deals with the Flygt drainage pump models numbers 2610, 2620, 2630, 2640, 2660 and 2670. We'll work on model 2670 as a general example and show the other models when anything differs. We'll show how to dismantle the pump completely and then reassemble it. Before starting to work on the pump, read the workshop manual carefully. Well, let's begin. This is the symbol for the plug where an eye bolt can be mounted. Mount the eye bolt. Lift the pump horizontally with an overhead crane and place it on a relief table. This is the symbol for the plug of the inspection chamber. Remove the inspection plug and drain any leakage into a container. This is the symbol of the plug for the oil chamber. Remove the oil plug and drain the oil into a container. Unscrew the screws and remove the handle. Remove the discharge connection. Assemble the stand, special part number 608-2301. Use the screws that hold the handle. Turn the pump upside down. Remove the strainer, the suction cover, and O-ring. Lock the impeller with a screwdriver or similar to prevent rotation of the impeller. Loosen and remove the impeller screw and washer. Use a hexagon bit adapter, Allen socket, with a 100 mm or 4-inch extension. Turn the gland nut screw counterclockwise until the impeller breaks free from the shaft. Remove the impeller. Warning: worn impellers often have very sharp edges. Use protective gloves. Remove the screws holding the diffuser. Remove the diffuser by using a screwdriver in the prying groove. If the diffuser is stuck, use a dent puller to remove it. Remove the plastic plugs from the seal housing cover. Loosen the screws holding the seal housing cover. Remove the seal housing cover with its O-rings and the pressure equalizers. Remove the retaining ring holding the plug-in seal. Use 2 screwdrivers to remove the mechanical plug-in seal. Remove the screws holding the intermediate part. Use a dent puller to remove the intermediate part. Remove the cooling jacket. If it's stuck, tap it gently with a rubber mallet around the periphery. Press down the bearing holder and remove the solid spring ring. Screw the lifting eye bolt into the shaft end and carefully lift out the shaft unit bearing holder. Place the shaft unit, bearing holder, in a vise. Now, pump models 2610 and 2620. Remove the screws holding the handle and the top. Disconnect the electrical connections, stator leads, and the contactor capacitor unit. Tap gently on the bearing casing with a mallet. Remove the spring carefully with a screwdriver. Remove the protection casing. To dismantle the shaft rotor unit, fit an M8 by 50 screw to the back end of the stator housing unit. Press out the shaft rotor unit by tightening the screw while holding the shaft rotor unit. Undo the stator housing unit from the shaft rotor unit. Remove the screw. Back to model 2670. Remove the inner circlip. Remove the outer circlip. Bolt the Flygt special tool. See the workshop manual for the part number. Lubricate the puller screw and screw it in. Continue pulling until the bearing holder bearing comes off the shaft. Turn the bearing holder so that its bottom faces upwards. Place the puller drift against the bearing. Grease and screw the threaded rod by hand until it bottoms. Fit the washer and screw on the long hexagonal nut. Screw until the bearing loosens. You'll hear a click sound. Remove the puller cylinder. And the drift. Remove the bearing. Now we'll show you how to dismantle the bearing housing from the shaft rotor unit of models 2630, 2640 and 2660. Fit the puller ring for the bearing holder. Put the shaft rotor unit in a vise. Use the puller as bracket. Tighten the puller screw while holding the shaft rotor unit until it comes loose. Dismantle the bearing from the bearing holder. Place the bearing holder on the workbench. Press out the bearing with a 3-arm puller. Back to model 2670. Place the rotor shaft unit in the rotor support or a vise. Use a bearing puller to remove the support bearing. Put the pump on the stator housing. Remove the stand. Remove the junction box cover. Disconnect the power from the terminal board contactor unit. Loosen the 6 screws and remove the pump top. To remove the stator using the heat method, use LPG burners and heat the stator housing evenly and rapidly until the stator drops out. To assemble with the heating method, place the stator housing upside down. Heat the stator housing to approximately 150 degrees Celsius or 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Make sure that the locating pin on the outside of the stator fits into the matching groove in the stator housing when the stator is lowered into the housing. Make sure that the stator leads are facing the cable entry to the junction box. Make sure that the stator bottoms out in the stator housing. Allow the stator casing to cool before continuing to assemble the pump. Grease the shaft end. Place the support bearing on the shaft end regardless of which face is up. Use the bearing fitting tool to hammer down the bearing. Place the support washer in the bearing holder. Oil the bearing seat. Place the bearing in position regardless of which face is up. Place the tool piston on the bearing. Place the puller cylinder over the piston. Bolt the puller cylinder to the bearing holder. Oil the puller screw and use it to press the bearing into place. Remove the tool piston. Check that the support washer is in its correct position. Fit the outer circlip. Make sure that the circlip enters the groove of the bearing holder. Oil the rotor shaft. Place the bearing holder on the shaft. Place the puller tube against the bearing holder. Grease and screw the threaded rod by hand until it bottoms. Mount the washer and the long hexagonal nut. Tighten the nut by hand until it bottoms. Fit the bearing and the bearing holder. Fit the circlip into the groove of the shaft. Make sure that the circlip enters the groove of the shaft. Now to pump models 2610, 20, 30, 40 and 60. Place the bearing housing on a workbench. Place the press sleeve in position. Grease and fit the bearing in position with the bearing designation upwards. Use the 3 jaws puller to push the bearing in position. Place the shaft rotor unit in a vise. Oil the shaft and fit the bearing holder onto the shaft. Use a suitable drift to tap the bearing on the inner race into place. Back to model 2670. Grease the O-ring and put it in place. Mount the pump top. Line up the connection box in the top with the stator leads in the stator housing. Fit new greased O-rings onto the bolts. Tighten diametral opposite screws alternately. Assemble the stand. Turn the pump upside down. Grease and place the spring washer in the upper bearing holder. Fit a new greased O-ring onto the bearing holder. Screw the lifting eye bolt into the shaft end. Carefully lower the rotor shaft unit with the bearing holder. At the same time, turning the bearing holder to the index mark. If the pump is equipped with a thermal sensor, connect it with the bearing holder. Grease the solid spring ring and fit it in position. Make sure that it enters the groove. Grease and fit a new O-ring. Mount the cooling jacket. Fit new greased O-rings on the intermediate part. Mount the intermediate part on the stator housing. Line up the inspection plug with the discharge connection of the pump and the hook symbol with the junction box cover. Fit the new greased O-rings onto the screws. Fit the screws. Tighten diametral opposite screws alternately. Grease the shaft. Fit a new oiled mechanical seal unit. Check that the drive pin engages in the drive groove in the shaft. Fit the circlip.
Yep.
Use a suitable sleeve to press down the circlip. Press down until you hear a click sound. Assemble a new set of pressure equalizers. Fit a new greased O-ring on the seal housing cover. Fit new greased O-rings . Tighten the screws on the seal housing cover. Fit the plastic plugs. Be sure to turn the plug into the right position. Fit a new greased O-ring. Assemble the diffuser. Grease and fit the screws, and tighten alternately to the correct torque. Make sure that the end of the shaft is clean and free from burrs. Polish off any flaws. Grease the end of the shaft, the threads of the gland screw, the conical sleeve, and the impeller screw. Align the edge of the gland screw with the edge of the conical sleeve so that they're flush. Before assembly, check that the impeller screw is clean and easy to screw into the shaft. This is to prevent the shaft from rotating with the impeller screw. Assemble the conical sleeve onto the shaft. Put the impeller in place. Mount the suction cover with its new greased O-ring. Grease the screws. Tighten the screws to the correct torque. Check that the impeller moves freely. Turn the gland screw clockwise until the impeller makes contact with the suction cover. Tighten it a further 1/8 turn, 45 degrees. This will ensure the correct clearance between the impeller and the suction cover in the next step. Lock the impeller with a screwdriver or similar to prevent rotation of the impeller. Fit the washer and the greased impeller screw, and tighten to the correct torque and a further 1/8 turn, 45 degrees. Check that the impeller rotates freely. Mount the strainer. Grease. Mount the nuts and tighten to the correct torque. Turn the pump upside. Remove the stand and fit the handle. Mount the terminal board contactor unit holder. Connect the stator and power cable leads to the terminal board contactor unit according to the wiring diagram. Fit a new greased O-ring on the cover. Mount the cover. Grease the screws. And tighten to the correct torque. Check that the cover is in the correct position. Remove the lifting eye bolt. Grease the O-ring, put it on the screw, and screw it into place. Fit a new U-ring in the discharge connection. Tighten the discharge connection to the correct torque. Now to pump models 2610 and 2620. Mount the protection casing, making sure that the arrow points at the arrow. Mount the cooling jacket in the correct position. Connect the stator leads and power cable to the terminal board, contactor unit, capacitor unit, according to the wiring diagram. Grease the O-ring and put it in place. Attach the power cables. Mount the top. Put on the handle. Grease the bolts and put them in. Tighten them to the correct torque. Back to model 2670. Place the pump in a horizontal position. Remove the oil plug. Fill the correct amount of oil. Fit the oil plug with a new O-ring and tighten to the correct torque. Proceed with the necessary electrical tests. Another pump ready for operation.